Humanity, as a species and an entity, is capable of great things. Fantastic feats that defy the imagination, awe-inspiring achievements accumulated over years, decades, and even centuries of constant progress forward. But one of the goals that continues to elude us is perhaps the most important: the pursuit of peace. But what is peace? Human beings, we're very accustomed to the defined, to the concrete, and so when we are asked what peace is, we tend to go for something like the absence of conflict, the absence of strife, the absence of war. But really, peace entails so much more than that. It entails some inextricably human values that we need to acknowledge. To illustrate this point, I'd like to borrow words from one of the greatest advocates for peace in our time and our ability to achieve it, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He told us that peace is not only the goal, but also the means of achieving it. That means that peace not only entails a lack of violence, but denouncing it, preventing it, and recognizing that violence is now an obsolete concept, one that we no longer need. Therefore, true peace also entails not only a lack of violence, rather a state of tranquility, a state of comfort, not only to be alive, but to have a life, and to live it however you wish to. Nowadays, however, true peace seems lacking. Nowadays, we see racism, contempt, and inequality run rampant across the world. These issues, which often have misconceptions and stereotypes at their core, are the ones that create a planet in a perpetual state almost autonomous to that of true peace. We see, for example, an unprecedented number of votes for Marine Le Pen and the National Front in the French election. We see continued oppression of certain groups in Eastern Europe, like LGBT individuals, and closer on a personal level, we see the United States reject anything that seems even remotely foreign, after years of history of being a melting pot for several different cultures. Therefore, we see constant issues popping up that are completely in contrast to what true peace should be. And in the face of these issues, the rhetoric that drives political movements like this forward is the same rhetoric that forces certain groups into corners and puts a gun to their head. There may be no gunpowder, there may be no loud bang, but the threat behind it is no less real. These people become oppressed. These people do not live in the state of comfort that true peace must have. It seems almost like a dystopia. Even if democratic ideals are the ones that push these sorts of groups to almost unthinkable power, it is the same power that they gain that will destroy democratic ideals in the end. And so, true peace will never be achieved. At this point in my speech, it may well seem that I'm fear-mongering or falling into fallacies like all of these leaders do. But it's necessary to acknowledge a problem before we are able to solve it. This is the looming demon on our doorstep. This is the problem we face. This is the crossroads in the path of human history where if we choose the wrong road, we and all of our fantastic achievements will be buried under a mountain of hate and disdain that we have created for others and ourselves. But I am also here to tell you that there is a solution. What we need to do is look at ourselves in the mirror, and we need to get up and act. We need to look the demon in the face. We need to say right to him. We need to look him in the eyes, stand proud, and say that the human race will not fall. The human race will not go down easy, and the human race stands for ourselves and for others. That even if this demon surrounds us with shadows that seem to darken every day, that will simply inspire us to shine all the brighter. But to do that, we need to redefine peace. Because often, when the conflict isn't close to home, when it doesn't really threaten our own families, we seem content to think that our era is one of peace, that we simply live without having to dodge bullets every day, and that means that we're perfectly fine. But that sort of thinking has led us to be content and ambivalent, to not acknowledge the issues that we face today. That means that we need to redefine peace and start looking for true peace. And when we do that, when we redefine peace as what it should be, we may begin to reflect. When we redefine peace as what it should be, we may realize that we still have a ways to go and that we still have work to do. And it fills me with hope to say that when we redefine peace, in the end, maybe, just maybe, we can all get started on the gargantuan task of trying to achieve it.
So you talk about this perfect world where there will be no violence, and that's what we need to achieve this peace. Do you think that would also apply to the definition of violence, which includes psychological violence and threats, cajoling, and all that sort of stuff? And how do you think a society could work, and how could we still have responsibilities and all those sorts of things if we can't threaten and punish people?
Well, I think that the greatest incentive for action is not a threat or cajoling or any sort of psychological violence. I think the best way to motivate somebody to do something is to give them an incentive rather than to use a stick, to use a carrot, and in that way to motivate people to take action. So I do think that a society could work even if there is no violence, because we only need to help each other and we need to give each other incentives to do good things rather than threaten each other to achieve our own selfish goals.
Well, you call upon us to redefine peace, but how would you redefine peace? What would be your definition then?
I believe my definition of peace would be closer to what I've been talking about in my speech, closer to something of non-violence, closer to something of no stereotypes, closer to something of, yes, a very lofty ideal. And at the end of the day, I think that that definition does have to be lofty so that we can actually aspire to reach it, because if we give it a very defined, sort of closed definition, then we won't always be aspiring to reach to something better. And I feel that constant aspiration is necessary for improvement, and therefore my definition of peace would be a very lofty one, but I think it would be the one that most works for us.
How can you have peace without justice? And doesn't justice involve an element of compulsion, one way or the other, either through the United Nations, through the courts, or sometimes through conflict?
Yes, I perfectly understand your point, but the way to reach justice, I believe, rather than through compulsion, is again through incentives. If, say, we had lived in a perfect world that had originated perfectly, then the need for compulsion would have never existed. But of course, working towards that is going to be far more difficult. But I feel that if we keep doing compulsion, it may sound very cliche, but violence will only breed violence. So in order to stop a cycle, we do need to take action. And action that is clearly defined in contrast to what has been happening so far. Because if we don't, we'll just keep going in this cycle and we'll always have these issues pop up again in different forms, in different countries, in different ways. But they'll be the same issues because we haven't addressed the core of where they come from. So I believe that justice is indeed necessary for us to have peace, but the way to achieve it will never be through compulsion, or we'll fall into even more injustices.